Hello, it's Tom here.
And Katalin.
I want to take you through a journey that we had in New York over August and September 2013, where we had the most amazing experience. We set out in the good weather, because it was August and September, so northern summer, to attempt to walk every path within Central Park. You can see from the map here that it's got an extensive road system that goes around the circumference of the park, and then numerous paths inside the park itself, and then a series of lakes and ponds. The park itself is just amazing, but you can see from the statistics here just how extensive the park is in terms of its features. So here we are, ready for our walk each morning, and we walk for about an hour each day.
We were about 5 to 7 minutes walk from our apartment.
So starting with the skyline, you can see here looking down into the park is basically a forest, and there at the bottom of the photo you can see the entrance that we used into the park. So the skyline around the park is typical Manhattan.
Even though you can see the multitude of towers surrounding the park, it doesn't feel like it's crowding into the park. You can't imagine how expansive the park is once you're inside it.
Cutting through the park are a series of major roads which link the west and the east of Manhattan, but these roads are sunk down, so actually when you're in the park you don't actually see them. The park has a major road system where people on their bicycles go around, taxis use it early in the morning, but the roads itself are closed from 10 a.m. through till 5 in the evening.
And there's the major entrance that I was speaking to, but there are a multitude of entrances to the park all the way up and down.
At our entrance there are a range of rickshaws that you can rent, and you'll see these all around the major roads inside the park. You can also rent a horse-drawn carriage and take a leisurely trot through the park. There are lots and lots of people who use the park, and on the weekend it can actually get very crowded with the bicycles and the people running and walking. The park has many lawns, and these are very extensive, large ones and small ones, some used for baseball fields, others just for people to lounge in.
And you'll see that there are not too many people there. Don't be fooled. This is just the morning walk. At the end of the day you'll see photos where it's crowded with people.
And then we spent most of our time walking the numerous paths through the park, and they're enormously diversified. They go through all sorts of different terrain across the lawns, in and out of forests, under bridges. They are only used for walking and running. The bicycles are not allowed on them.
And dogs must be on a leash.
So you can see there's lots and lots of people using these. Most of our photos were taken during the work week, and so there weren't as many people on some of the forest tracks as you'd expect on the weekend. As you can see, there are tremendous differences between different parts of the park.
One of the surprising things you'd find with Central Park is just how clean and how safe it is. You feel safe walking through the park at any time. It is, even when there's no one else near you, you still feel very safe. And there's me, lounging on a bench. In fact, I just am constantly interested in the various plaques on each bench donated from the various families, such as this one.
And then beautiful gardens around different parts of the park, and there are one large lake, which is the Jackie Kennedy Onassis Lake, but then there are a series of smaller lakes and ponds throughout the park.
This is a particularly interesting one with Jackie Kennedy Onassis Reservoir, because you're only allowed to run in one direction, and the very first time we went there we didn't see the sign and we couldn't understand why everybody was going in the opposite direction. They were very polite, no one actually told us off.
What we particularly liked are the ponds in all sorts of different places around the park, and particularly those in the more forested areas where there are very few people. Once you're in these areas, often you just can't see any other people and you can't see the skyline because you're in the forest, and it looks like you're in a heavily forested, wooded area in the mountains.
As we said earlier, the terrain varies enormously. You can't imagine the elevation you can find once you're walking, and you'll find waterfalls and steep climbs. It is quite remarkable that in a park like this you'll have these steep climbs.
And then there are also some fountains in different parts of the park, and lots of sculptures, which we'll look at later. And then what I particularly liked was the change in elevations from one part of the park to the other, and all of these most interesting stairs that have been carved out of the rocky outcrops throughout the park.
And sometimes when you reach the summit of one of these staircases, you could be several stories high. It's quite amazing.
And then there are lots of bridges, and every bridge within the park is of a unique design. And some of them go across the arterial roads, others are for the horse track, some for the bicycle tracks, and some just in the forests, making it an interesting walk.
Tom was totally enamoured of the bridges. He must have taken several shots of every one of them.
But I love the effect of the tunnels and just the fact that every bridge was different. Here's an example of just a unique type of bridge which was in the northern part of the park over a pond. And as you can see, it's very rustic in its design. And then also in the park you see these rocky outcrops giving you some idea of what Manhattan was like before civilization.
And urbanisation, but you can understand why they were able to build such huge towers on this bedrock.
And then lots and lots of sculptures commemorating different events and different people in New York's history. So here's a good example. Here's Hans Christian Andersen.
And every sculpture, every monument, every bench, every brick, every park, everything in the park has been donated. The philanthropy in this city is quite astronomical.
There was one person who gave $100 million for maintenance of the park. And then there are these extensive lawns which we talked about earlier, but this will give you an idea of how they're used. So, for example, on the Great Lawn, there are a series of baseball pitches. People use the park for picnics right throughout the week, and particularly on the weekend.
There are several baseball fields, not just one.
And then lots and lots of events in the park. So this was a fun run. People gathered together to do their own personal events. So here's a series of New York nannies taking their kids out for an activity. Then there's a major open-air stadium, the
boat shed, where they have rental boats, but also there's a very nice restaurant, bar and function centre within it.
On the weekend we saw a line of people which must have stretched for about 300 metres waiting to rent the boats. And then other activities within the park itself. And of course, the world-famous Central Park Zoo. There's a theatre in the park which gives free plays, and people line up for days waiting to get their free tickets.
And this line went for kilometres.
And then there's the film festival, another event. There's a concert venue in the park. And then, of course, some famous areas that you'll recognise. Strawberry Fields commemorates the death of John Lennon. And there are tour groups that go through the park all the time, visiting these different places.
And this mosaic of Imagine runs parallel with the apartment tower that John Lennon actually lived in and that Yoko Ono still does live in.
And then activities. So here's one of the smaller lakes where people rent these little yachts. And then, of course, there's for kids the carousel and an amusement park.
Which in the summer is an amusement park, and in winter all of this is removed, and we actually saw this. They'd removed all of this by the end of September, getting it ready for an ice skating rink.
And then, as you can see, we were just amazed at the number of people that came into the park on the weekend. And then there is a series of restaurants throughout the park.
A lunch that I had with Deb and her children, and Tom very kindly took our photo, and this was at the Boathouse.
Some other restaurants, and then for children, just an extensive range of activities and playgrounds throughout the park. And so that was our trip to New York, and I think that Central Park for us was the standout of our trip.
And we can't wait to return and spend more time in the city, spend more time in the park, and just continue to explore and discover more and more of the city's great energy and buzz.